Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Andrea Sankey in Paris. Tonight, bringing Russia before the International Court of Justice. With conflict over South Ossetia still simmering, Georgia has filed a historic case against the Russian Federation for alleged ethnic cleansing. Now, events of the last week are included in the complaint, but Georgia says evidence of Russian war crimes dates back to 1993. Allegedly, the separatist regimes of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, backed by Russia, have displaced as many as 300,000 ethnic Georgians. But proving these allegations before the ICJ will be a serious challenge. And joining me now to talk about what chance Georgia has is the man responsible for prosecuting the case. He is Georgia's own legal advisor and professor of international law at McGill University in Montreal, Payam Akhavan. Dr. Akhavan, thank you so much for joining us from The Hague.
My pleasure.
Now, from both sides of the conflict, we've been hearing for a long enough time allegations of war crimes ranging from forced displacement to even genocide. What does Georgia have in this case that makes you confident Russia can actually be held criminally responsible for ethnic cleansing?
Well, there's overwhelming evidence that Russia has, from the outset of these conflicts in the early 1990s, when Georgia had just become an independent state, actively armed and supported ethnic separatists in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and that Russian armed forces themselves have participated directly. And it's important to note that there is this historical context within which the present conflict has to be understood. After 1994, when Russia had helped dismember Georgian territory, destabilize the state, it imposed itself as a supposedly neutral peacekeeping force, but it's become very clear now that Russia was never a peacekeeper, but was rather a party to the conflict in what is effectively a war between Russia and Georgia. Towards the early part of 2008, in flagrant violation of its international obligations, Russia indicated that it would move to recognize Abkhazia and South Ossetia's claims of independence, even though those entities are built on ethnic cleansing and in disregard of Georgia's territorial integrity. And there are numerous reports, Human Rights Watch reports, media reports, reports from witnesses, journalists, which testify to Russia's direct role in ethnic cleansing from the 1990s. We have official statements of then President Vladimir Putin openly saying that we will recognize these breakaway entities. And most recently, as a result of the present conflict, evidence has emerged that the same pattern of ethnic cleansing, of burning and looting of villages and murder of civilians is taking place as we speak.
Okay, I mean, as regards the allegations you cited dating back to the early 90s, a report by Human Rights Watch issued in 1996 actually says some 100,000 ethnic South Ossetians were forced to flee Georgia when their villages were attacked in 1991. How far can you get with your case when Russia actually has this kind of information at its disposal?
Well, the first point is that there's no denying that as a result of these autonomous areas being encouraged to secede by the authorities in Moscow, there was a conflict and that there were human rights abuses by both sides. And I think that it would be difficult to find any armed conflict where there aren't human rights abuses by both sides. But the overwhelming victims of these wars have been ethnic Georgians. The statistics are very simple. In Abkhazia, 18% of the population was ethnic Abkhaz and 60% was ethnic Georgian. That is why you have some 300,000 Georgian displaced persons as a result of the ethnic cleansing. And it's very clear that were it not for Russia's intervention on the side of the ethnic separatists, that it would have been impossible to expel those numbers. And the point is that had these regions not been encouraged by Moscow to seek secession, that the conflicts would not have begun in the first place. Okay. So this is not to say that it is a completely black and white picture, but the overwhelming acts of ethnic cleansing and aggression have involved Georgian victims.
So it has to be the overwhelming evidence in Georgia's favor then, because part of the case also includes allegations of ethnic cleansing committed in the conflict over South Ossetia that's still underway. And Russia claims Georgia's military has killed thousands of ethnic Russians in South Ossetia, as well as 74 Russian peacekeepers. But you can still defend this part of the case if Georgia is found to have killed civilians as well?
Well, Russia, in its propaganda machine, has filled the media with the story that 2,000 civilians were killed in the very brief attack of Georgia on South Ossetia, which was a result of South Ossetian forces shelling Georgian villages and killing scores of civilians. Human Rights Watch today, in an interview that's published in the Herald Tribune, indicated that there is no evidence whatsoever of 2,000 civilians having been killed, and Human Rights Watch researcher, which is on the ground in Georgia, indicates that there were no more than 100 casualties, and it's not even clear how many of those were actually combatants and how many were civilians.
Okay.
So the figure of 2,000 is a complete fabrication, and the fact that Georgia has brought this case before the International Court of Justice is an expression of confidence on the part of Georgia that it has nothing to conceal, it has nothing to hide.
Okay.
So it's now for Russia to come before the court and to demonstrate that Georgia has violated international law, where Russia is overwhelmingly the party that we believe is responsible for ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity.
And just to be clear then, you don't worry at all that the events of last week could make this case harder for you to prosecute?
No, I don't believe so. Georgia was acting within its right as a sovereign state, first of all, to repel attacks by separatist militia who were shelling Georgian villages and posing a threat to the lives of Georgian citizens. And there is no evidence that in asserting its rights as a sovereign state to regain control of those breakaway republics, that Georgia has violated international law. On the contrary, the question is whether Russia has not committed the crime of aggression by openly violating Georgia's sovereignty. And when we speak about Russian peacekeepers, the condition for being a peacekeeper is neutrality. And I think that there is no doubt whatsoever now that those peacekeepers who failed during 15 years to fulfill their mandate was to allow for the return of those 300,000 displaced persons to their homes. Russia has not only failed to do that, but has moved to actually recognize the independence of those republics. How can one speak about neutral peacekeepers under those conditions?
I mean, do you expect Russia then now to maneuver either diplomatically or otherwise to stop this case from going forward? Or do you think Russia maybe is looking forward to actually having its day in court and making the same allegations against Georgia?
Well, what's remarkable is that although President Medvedev, Prime Minister Putin accused Georgia of genocide and aggression and threatened to take Georgia to The Hague, they've been remarkably silent. There's been no official Russian response to Georgia's decision to bring this case to the court. What I can tell you is that yesterday Georgia filed an urgent request for interim measures before the court. So within the next 3 or 4 weeks, Russia will have to come before the court to answer Georgia's allegations. And I think that Russia's silence and its eventual challenge to the jurisdiction of the court, which I predict will be the case, will speak volumes about who really comes to the court with clean hands and who comes to the court having significantly violated international law.